Hello and welcome to the Adventure Toolkit example reel number 18. My name is Glenn Storm and I'm from Hot Iron Productions, and today we're going to continue looking at the tools that were introduced in version 1.1. Starting with, in the event category, IntervalTrigger. The IntervalTrigger is designed to trigger other objects or activate them on time intervals. Let's look at the properties. First is interval mode. So this tool can activate another object based on a regular time interval, like once every second or once every 5 seconds, for example, or a range of time intervals, a random range, or a Gaussian range. Now, the best way I can think of to describe the difference between a Gaussian range and a regular random range would be to say that a random range can happen anywhere within the range, but a Gaussian distribution is typically in the middle of that range, and you can think of it like a bell curve, where most of the time a Gaussian interval would be in the middle of that range, and it would rarely be at the extremes of that range. Random range can be anywhere within that range. Okay. The next property is interval, and this is the base time in seconds that the interval will take place. So I've configured this to be a regular interval at 1 second. So this trigger, this interval trigger is set to activate another object every second. The next property is interval variance, and if I had set this to anything except regular, this is the number of seconds that that interval could vary. So if I set this to 1, for example, it could be anywhere between 0 and 2 seconds. Okay, but this is regular. Next is activate on trigger. This is the object that will be activated at that interval. So in this example, I've set this to activate an object that we used in a previous video. This is the economy trigger that will hurt the player, or in other words, decrease the value that we've been calling health in our economy manager. So if I hit play and activate this interval trigger, every second it will hurt the player, and we'll see the health tick down once every second. 90, 80, 70, 60, every second. So if I try to reconfigure this now to be a random range, and I set the interval variance to what I mentioned before, anywhere between 0 and 2 seconds, because the variance is 1. Now when I hit play and activate the trigger, it should hurt it quickly sometimes and take up to 2 seconds other times. Okay, so that's the interval trigger. Next is the logical trigger. The logical trigger is designed to activate another object based on the activation state of other objects, and it will make a logical evaluation of that. Let's look at the properties. First is the logic mode. So again, we're looking at the activation state of other objects, and we're going to evaluate that. This trigger is set to AND currently. This means that it is looking at the other objects, and it's looking to make sure that all of the other objects are active. That would mean that the logical evaluation turns out to be true, and it would activate another object. The other logical modes are not, which is to say it looks to make sure that none of the other objects are active. Then there's OR, which means that any one of the objects it's looking at can be active, and that means the logical evaluation turns out to be true. The last one is XOR, or exclusive OR, and that means that one and only one of the objects it's looking at can be active for this logical evaluation to be true, otherwise it's going to be false. Whether this evaluation is true or false determines whether or not it will activate the other object. Okay, so that's the logical mode. Next is logical key objects, and this is the list of objects it is looking at. This is the objects it's looking at to evaluate based on the logical mode, and it's looking at the activation state of these objects. In this case, I've got 3. They are key A, key B, and key C. And right now, one of them is inactive. It's key B, and it's deactivated in this case. So with this logical mode being AND, it's looking to make sure that all of them are active. And right now, one of them is inactive. So this would evaluate to be false. Okay. If it were to evaluate as true, it would activate an object. The very next property is LogicalTrigger, and this is the object to activate if this evaluation turns out to be true. In this case, I've got an object called unlock, and we'll look for this object to turn on or off based on the logical evaluation. The next property is deactivate if false. So, if the logical evaluation turns out to be true, you turn on that logical target. If this checkbox is on, it will turn off that object if the logical evaluation is false. Otherwise, it will leave it alone. The last property is reset on trigger, and if this is true, this trigger will turn itself off after doing an evaluation and get ready to re-evaluate when reactivated. Okay. So again, we've got this set to AND, and we're looking at key A, key B, and key C. Key B is currently off, and if I hit play and activate this logical trigger, it's actually not going to do anything because it's not supposed to. It is looking to make sure that all of them are on, and currently key B is off, so unlock never gets turned on. If, however, I turned it to OR, okay, then any one of these can be active, and that would evaluate this. That would make this evaluation turn out to be true. So indeed, it turns unlock on. Okay. If I set this to exclusive OR, again, that means that one and only one of these objects can be active for this evaluation to be true. And because I've set this to deactivate if false, it actually turns off the unlock object. If I set this to not, again, that would mean it's making sure that none of these objects are active, and that will evaluate as false. To really drive this point home, instead of turning on and off this object called unlock, I will turn on or off this object called door mover. Here's a door. It will open the door if everything turns out to be true. So again, if it's not, it's looking to make sure nothing is active. Currently, two of them are active, so it doesn't work. If I set this key B to be on and set this to be AND, it's making sure that all of them are active, and then it will actually open the door, and sure enough, it will. If it's OR, it looks to make sure that any one of them can be active, and that will evaluate to be true. So again, it does open the door because at least one of them is active. So exclusive OR means that one and only one can be active, and then it will evaluate as true, so we actually have to turn all of them off except for one for this to actually work. There we go. Okay. LogicalTrigger, very powerful. Let's move on. The next tool is SpawnLife. SpawnLife is used with the Spawn trigger, and it is meant to delete objects after a certain amount of time. Let's look at the properties. One is lifespan. This is the number of seconds to let this object live before it is destroyed. The next property is spawn trigger. This would be a reference to the spawn trigger that spawned the object if this object were in fact spawned by a spawn trigger. In this case, it isn't. And we left this tool in the tool set available for you because there are cases where you would like an object to live for a certain amount of time in your scene before dying. And it works as simply as that. If I turn this thing on, it will wait 3 seconds, and then this object will be destroyed. Okay, it's as simple as that. You can leave spawn trigger blank. It doesn't need a reference in order to work. Okay. The last tool we have to look at quickly is in the interaction menu. It's the MenuTrigger. The MenuTrigger tool is designed to work with a menu manager. And the menu manager was originally developed to take the place of a main menu in your game. But there are cases where you'd like a mid-game menu, just some kind of OK button or a yes or no question or some kind of interaction that's outside of the main menu. So instead of developing a new tool to make whole new menus, we just made a MenuTrigger, which would work with a menu manager and evaluate the button states just the same as the Scene Manager does. So let's look at the properties. First is a reference to the Menu Manager object. That's Menu Manager. The next is a list of button controls, and this does match what you have in the Scene Manager. It's called a list of buttons called controls. The button controls have button label, and this does need to match the label of your button, just like it does in Scene Manager. In this case, I've got a menu with two buttons, yes and no, and so I've got two button controls also labeled yes and no. The next property is button action. This is what to do based on the pressed or unpressed state of that button. Buttons can be toggled on or off, and so there are 4 states. You can activate once the button is pressed. You can activate when a button is unpressed, that is, it will wait until it has been turned from being pressed to unpressed in order to activate another object. You can set the other object to match the pressed state of the button. So if it is pressed, that button will be turned on, and if it is unpressed, it will be turned off. Or you can do the opposite. Active opposite press makes sure that the object is on when the button is off, and vice versa. Okay, the last property is target object, and this is a reference to the object to control based on the button pressed state. Okay, so I've got 2 objects here. Yes was pressed and no was pressed. They're currently off. If I start the scene, I see the menu doing its job. The Menu Manager is presenting a bit of text, says answer this, and 2 buttons, yes and no. The MenuTrigger is just looking at those buttons, and it's going to activate these objects if I press the button. So if I press yes, yes was pressed is active. If I press no, no was pressed is active. Okay, so that is the MenuTrigger, the SpawnLife tool, the LogicalTrigger, and the IntervalTrigger. And that's all the time we have on this video, and that's all the new tools in the version 1.1 of the Adventure Toolkit. Thank you for watching this video. Please stay tuned for the next one.